Hello and welcome to the API development series with FastAPI. In the previous lecture, we learned about models, schemas, and dependency injection. Now, in this video, we will start by creating an API route to create new books with the help of HTTP verbs and API router. We already covered API router in this series. In case of any confusion, you can see setup API router in FastAPI video once again. Next, we will create a new folder for API versioning inside APIs folder. After that, we will also create a repository folder inside the DB directory. Then in the repository folder, we will again create a new file named books.py to keep ORM queries and functions related to the books table. Now it's time to create an API route. I am sure you remember we created a simple route in the previous lecture. If not, you can see the video how to create REST endpoint using FastAPI. So let's go ahead and see what else we are going to do. This time we will create an API route by using Pydantic schemas, database connection, and dependency injection. Then we will also perform CRUD operation on those API routes or paths and will get books details from the database. For that, we will create a new folder structure to make an API route for books, which we already discussed at the beginning of this video. So let me create a base.py file inside the APIs folder. Here we have API router from FastAPI. Then we have route underscore books from version folder of APIs directory. Next, we have an API router instance, and finally, we include the router of route underscore dot books dot py file with it and declare the prefix and tags as slash books and books respectively. Next, I am creating a new folder named version 1 and a route underscore books dot py file. Since we just created this folder, so I named it version 1. Later you can change this folder's name to version 2, version 3 and so on as per your add-ons on the project. Now in the route underscore books.py file, we have API router and depends from FastAPI, session from SQLAlchemy ORM, book create schema from schema.books, dependency injection from db session, and create underscore new underscore book function from books file of repository folder. Then again, we have created an instance of API router and using this API router instance with post request. Next, we have schema book create in the post request, which was imported from the schemas. And we also have a db argument in the book underscore create function where db is going to be a SQLAlchemy session. Then we have made the session value which depends on the dependency injection, that is get underscore db. Next we are using create underscore new underscore book function from the books.py file of the repository folder and passing the book and db in it. And finally we are returning the book. So now let me create a repository folder in the DB directory, and for the ORM queries, a books.py file is also created in the same folder. These queries will communicate with the database. Here, let me import this session from SQLAlchemy ORM. Again, book create schema from schemas and book model from db.models. Next, we will make some functions and will use these functions to create, read, update, and delete the data from the database. So first I am creating create underscore new underscore book function with schema book create with B capital and C capital and the database session. Next, I created a book object for a new book with the help of book model. In this book object, we have the title, author, description, and rating field. Then we need to tell the database to add this new book. When the book is successfully added to the database, we will commit it with db.commit command. Then we will refresh the db with the new book object and finally returning the book object. Now, let me run the server and test this path on the Swagger documentation. Here, I am giving the book title, author, description, and rating. And when I execute the execute button, I can see the response in the response body. In the response body, we are not only getting the title, author, description, and rating, but we are also getting the ID from the database, which we declared in the models as the primary key is equals to true. Now, if we check the database on the SQLite Online IDE and run the select query, select star from books, we will see this book entry here. With this, we created a post route or path using the API router. Let me recap what we did. First, we had the necessary imports in the route_.py file. Then we had book schema and defined db as SQLAlchemy ORM session, where this session's default value should depends on the db, that is get_db. After that, we are passing the both schema and db session to create book and create new book function of books.py file of repository folder. Next, inside the books.py file of the repository folder, we have a book object which is a book model. With this model, we created a table structure. Next, let's move forward and see how to get books from the database. Now it's time to define a function in route_books.py that will return all the books from the database. Let's see how we can do that. We need a database session to get all the books. Then we used list_books, which was taken from the repository, and finally returning the book. Next, go to the repository folder. Here we are using the same database session and queried the books from the DB with the command db.query book.all. This command is similar to select star from books. Reload the Swagger documentation and now we will see the get path appears here. When we try this get path and execute the get request, we can see the list of all the books from the database. You can also check all the books on the URL localhost:8000 slash books slash all. It will show you the books from the database here as well. Next, we will see how to get books by their ID. For that, I am again going back to the route books file and importing the retrieve book function from the repository folder. Along with, I am also importing HTTP exception and status from FastAPI. Next, we need to create one more path with the get method and will pass the ID parameter in it. Then we created a read function with ID and database session and passing the same ID and DB session to retrieve books. Next, I am raising an HTTP exception to check if the book with the given ID is available in the database or not, and returned the response in the F string, which says book with ID does not exist. Finally, we are returning the book. Now, go to the books.py file of repository folder and write a query to the database model books. In this function, we are using the same ID and DB session coming from the route books and then filtering with the ID. Here, we need the first value with the requested parameter. So adding the SQLAlchemy's dot first also. The dot first will give us the first value which meets the condition. This query is similar to select star from books where book ID is equal to requested ID. Next, go to the documentation again and reload the page. You will see we have one more route with the get method. Let me check the book by ID number 3. As soon as I click on execute button, we will see the result in the response body. But if I want to see the book which is not in the database, then it will give an error. For example, if I pass ID 6, obviously it will give an error that says book with ID 6 does not exist with 404 error. You can also get the book with ID by visiting the local host at port number 8000 slash books or slash book ID. Book ID like 3. You can also check with the book ID 4. And if you try to access the URL for the book ID which is not available in the database, then you will see this error on the browser. So that's all from this video. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.